Okay, so now we move to the gospel, which is the Transfiguration, the feast of the Transfiguration of the Lord on August 6th every year. Whether it's a weekday or a Sunday, we celebrate the day. It's not a holy day of obligation. That's maybe part of what's confusing, is that sometimes when we have these special feast days, whether it's the Transfiguration of the Lord or the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul or the solemnity of the Annunciation, something like that, something that's a bigger feast day that overtakes a Sunday. I guess the Annunciation doesn't overtake a Sunday because it's always during Lent. But anyway, like those bigger feast days, the ones that overtake Sundays, we can think that maybe they're holy days of obligation, but they're not. There's only 5 holy days of obligation, and we hopefully know what those are: the Assumption of Our Lady, All Saints Day, the Immaculate Conception, Christmas, and Mary, Mother of God on January 1st. Anyway, there we go. Let's get into our gospel passage. Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9, which, if you're paying attention, we've already read this passage during the last year. So I started recording these videos in September, I think it was, or October last year, and I've been highlighting in my Bible the different places where we, so for example, I've got this passage highlighted here in my New Testament Bible here, or my Bible, my New American Bible, that's what I was trying to say, that I use just exclusively for this. And it's already highlighted. When did we use it? I'm pretty sure it was during Lent, actually. Maybe the second Sunday of Lent, which would have been a long time ago, but nonetheless, we already read it. So anyway, let's read it and we'll see what we can do. Maybe it's the same insights. Maybe you could go back and watch that video and you'll hear the same exact thing that I'm talking about. Who knows? Who knows? It's a mystery. Let's read. Okay, here we go. Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Okay, that's great. Okay, now what's actually important here is what we didn't read. I think it's important. Maybe it's not that important. But anyway, what we didn't read is at the very beginning of verse 1, it says, after 6 days. Well, what's after 6 days? So what's coming in chapter 16 actually is a pretty important thing that's going on. So in chapter 16, which we will read part of chapter 16, verses 13 through 20, the last Sunday of August this year. So we'll get into that. But what's going on here is the Lord reveals himself in a deeper way to his apostles. So in chapter 16, this is a really big thing. If you look at verse 13 through 20, this is Peter's confession about Jesus. When Jesus takes them to Caesarea Philippi, he says, who are the people saying that I am? And they're like, Moses and Elijah and the prophet, whatever. And then Jesus is like, but who do you say that I am? And they say, you are the Christ. And so from there, Jesus says, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. He establishes his church on the rock of Peter, which is an important thing, that Jesus has come, of course, to give his life as a ransom for many, to save people from their sins, but also to establish a church. And he establishes that church on apostolic foundations, specifically on the rock of Peter. Now that's important. And then from there, he talks about his passion, about how he's going to be handed over, how he's going to die, and then he'll be raised after 3 days. But nonetheless, he's talking about how he's going to die. And Peter, as the first act as Pope, he's like, no, God forbid, Lord. And then he doesn't get it. And then the Lord's like, okay, you're not thinking like God thinks, but you're thinking like men think. I need you to change your way of thinking, that kind of thing. And then he lays out conditions for discipleship, talking about how we need to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow after him. Okay, so then it's from that place of predicting his passion, of establishing Peter as the leader of his church, and then predicting his passion, that then after 6 days, he takes Peter, James, and John up the mountain. So within the apostles, there's the 12, of course, but then within the 12, there's this group of 3, Peter, James, and John, that for whatever reason, for some reason, Jesus, he shares a bit more intimacy with them and brings them into, like, for example, when he's having his agony in the garden, they're all together at the Lord's Supper, and then they go to the garden, but then from the garden he takes with him Peter, James, and John, and he goes further into the garden where he then experiences his agony and has to he sweats blood, and he has to wrestle with what he's about to do in sacrificing his life. So Peter, James, and John have this intimate relationship with him, that while the other apostles have an intimate relationship with him, there's something deeper going on here. Okay, nonetheless, so he takes them up the mountain, and this is the incredible thing. While they went up a high mountain, he was transfigured before them. Again, I mentioned this yesterday, or in the last video, metamorphosis, right? So his appearance is changed, transfigured. It goes above the figure that he normally had. He goes above that, and he's changed so that he's dazzling white. White is light, right? And bright as the sun. These kinds of things, which makes us think back to the first reading, where it talks about how the Ancient One took his throne, and his clothing was bright as snow, and the hair on his head as white as wool. So the Ancient One has this brightness to him, and now Jesus is revealed to have this brightness to him. So what's going on here? This is what we can call a theophany. So what's a theophany? It's like a divine manifestation, or a revelation of God. That's what's going on here. That Jesus, he talks about his passion, his death. He talks about his church that he's establishing, and now he's revealing to these 3, Peter, James, and John, he's revealing to them that the church that he's establishing, he has authority to establish, not as a human church, but as a divine institution. The passion that he's about to undergo, it's not another human dying tragically, but it is God himself giving himself for the life of the world. Like, that's what's going on, that he's revealing. Look, you're going to see all these things take place, but you need to know that as you see these things take place, that it is entirely voluntary, because I am God himself. I can do whatever I want to do, and so you need to know that when I undergo my passion, it is a voluntary undergoing of my passion. It's an incredible thing. And then what's more, who appears? Behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. You got to wonder, like, gosh, what's that conversation look like? Well, man, we don't know. It doesn't describe it. But what it does describe is that Moses and Elijah, these 2 monumental Old Testament figures, have a vision of Jesus, who is God, and they see him face to face, and they get to share this beautiful conversation with him. They're able to see what they longed to see. If you remember this, when was it? Maybe a couple of Sundays ago, when Jesus speaks to them and he says, many prophets and righteous people. Oh, this was a weekday mass reading. Anyway, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it. And they longed to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. These monumental figures, these holy and righteous men and women of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, but the Old Covenants, they longed to see the day of the Messiah. And now these 2 people, almost we could say as representatives, but whether representatives or just because it's those 2 being so holy, they now get to see Jesus face to face, and they see him where? On a mountain. This is also an important point. As I'm recording this, the weekday mass readings are about Moses going up the mountain in the book of Exodus, going up the mountain to encounter God, to see him face to face, as the Lord communicates to him the 10 Commandments, as the Lord communicates to him, and he passes before him so that Moses can see the back of his head and see the Lord himself. He reveals himself on a mountain. You think of Elijah in the first book of Kings, chapter 19. Elijah goes up the mountain, and he hears the Lord's voice in a tiny whispering sound, where the Lord reveals himself on a mountain. This is a common thing where you go up a mountain to encounter the Lord. You don't go down in a valley. You don't go out into the ocean, but you go up a mountain. And as you go up the mountain, there you can encounter God. And this is what's going on. The Lord takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. not just any mountain, but up a high mountain where they can encounter Jesus in this deeper, more incredible way, where it's incredible. Again, the Old Testament reading for today, it talks about how I saw one like a son of man coming, but then that one who is a son of man, he's revealed to be divine, where he's given dominion and power and kingship and glory. Right? All peoples and nations serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. And now Jesus, again, who appears to be human, merely human, he now is revealed to have a divine nature. He's revealed to be a divine person. It's incredible. The parallels here of it's the fulfillment, in so many ways, it's the fulfillment of the first reading. Now, we know there's still a further fulfillment that is coming, where at the end of time, Jesus will come again on the clouds. But here, it's like he's giving a taste of the fulfillment of that prophecy. Incredible. Okay, so anyway, then what happens? So they're conversing. Then Peter said in reply, he said to the Lord in reply to all of this, right? He's like, I see all this. And so it's like, in some ways, this is like God himself speaking in action, in this transfiguration. And now Peter says in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. That's like the understatement of the century, right? It is good that we are here. Nonetheless, that's true. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Again, this is something that takes place in the book of Exodus, where the Lord reveals himself in the glory, right? The cloud, the pillar of cloud that goes before them. And then Moses goes up the mountain to encounter the Lord. And then from there, they establish the tabernacle. They build the tent of the dwelling presence. So this was before they enter into the promised land. This is before they build the temple, obviously. This is while they're still in the desert. They build the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, where the Lord's presence lives among them. And so Peter, you can imagine, he's not really sure. In fact, a couple of the other gospels say he doesn't even know what he's saying, but you can imagine his instinct is like, we got to keep this moment, like we got to stay here. Sometimes in some ways we can encounter this in smaller ways, when you see a beautiful sunset or when you have a really beautiful moment in your life, whatever it is, it's just like, oh man, I want to stay here forever. I want to stay here. How much more when you encounter God face to face? It's like, I got to stay here. I want to stay. But nonetheless, while he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, this is my beloved son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. This is incredible. So not only is it a theophany of Jesus, who is God, but we can also see something of a Trinitarian theophany going on here, where, of course, Jesus is the divine Son, but then the voice is what? This is my beloved Son. Well, if Jesus is the Son, then that means the voice, the one who speaks with the voice, is the Father, and the cloud is the Holy Spirit. The cloud which overshadows, just like in the book of the Gospel of Luke, where it says the Holy Spirit will overshadow you. This is the cloud that overshadows everything. It's a theophany of the entire Trinity. What an incredible moment. And what does it do? Some people might say, well, this is awesome. Like, I'm all in on it. But in fact, if we really take a moment to consider it, seeing God in all of his glory, it's going to lead us to what? When the disciples heard this voice that they can't see where it's coming from, but they hear this booming voice, the bright cloud that overshadows Jesus, who was transfigured, speaking with Moses and Elijah. It says, when they heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. There's something else, just like, oh, where am I right now? Where am I? And so it's just like, I'm not worthy of this. I don't even know what the heck I'm doing here. This is too, it's so, right? Just like in the book of Exodus, again, we keep going back to this because there's some real strong parallels going on here. When Moses speaks to the Lord, and the Lord then communicates to all of the people, I can't remember what chapter it's in, but he communicates to all the people with like a blare of trumpet and thunder blasts and peals of lightning and fire and all these different things. It says that the people said, you know what, Moses, from now on, how about the Lord just talks to you and then you talk to us, because we can't stand the fear that this causes when the Lord, in his booming voice and his greatness and his magnitude, is all of his glory, when he communicates to us face to face, we can't really handle that. And so Moses, how about from now on, you just be the guy that goes in between. Right? There's something about coming into the presence of God in all of his glory and all of his majesty and all of his magnitude that actually it inspires a kind of fear. Not because God is so terrible, but because his presence is just so great. It's so great and magnified that it's just like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know if I really want to be in this presence right now. There's something that needs purification in me, and I'm not purified. I'm not there yet. I need the purification. I need the coal, like Isaiah saw in Isaiah 6. I need the charcoal that can come and purify me so that I can be more comfortable in the presence of the Lord. But I'm not there yet. So there's something there. And then anyway, so what? But then Jesus came, and so it's in some ways it's like maybe it's over the moment it begins. Who knows? Who knows how long it lasted? But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Rise and do not be afraid." Jesus, the fire sent from heaven, who has come to set the world on fire, he comes and he purifies them. He touches them and says, "Rise and do not be afraid." And then when they raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. The moment is past, but nonetheless, now they know who Jesus is in a deeper, more intimate way, a more powerful way, so that they don't have to be afraid. What's fascinating, of course, is that we know that all of the apostles abandoned Jesus in his trial and in his passion, except for John. So you can imagine John just clinging to this of just like, no, I know who he is. I know who he is. Peter and James, they must have forgotten or something, who knows? But John, he's just like, no. I saw him. I saw him. And we're going to see what Peter has to say in our next reading tomorrow, but in the next video. But nonetheless, like, this is what's going on. So as they were coming down the mountain, right? So every mountain moment with the Lord where we encounter him in this deep way, we have to come down the mountain. So when they were coming down the mountain, Jesus charged them, "Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is, again, the messianic secret. I think I've mentioned this before. There's something that Jesus, he doesn't want all of his mysteries to be revealed right away, but instead maybe slowly and progressively to be revealed, which, again, you can imagine the disciples as they're hearing this, until he's been raised from the dead. There's something like, what? Which he had just told them in chapter 16 that he was going to rise from the dead. But now it's just like, okay, I don't understand this, but something incredible is going on. So we just gotta wait. We just gotta wait and let itself play out and let ourselves be caught up in the mystery of who Jesus is. Whew, man, so good. So good. Okay, God bless you. We'll see you for the next video.